children of polyamorous, polygamist parents. How was your childhood and when did you understand? Did it affect your idea of love? NSFW. I can answer this. My parents were in an open relationship until around the time I was 17. I didn't know what an open relationship was until I was 8, but people in my life would keep making jokes about it that I suddenly understood once I got it. To be honest, it was really rough. Not only did my parents pursue people that I had already known, such as my classmates' parents, but from time to time they would get very serious with one of their other partners. My mum in particular was in a secondary relationship with another woman from the time I was 3 until I was 14 years old. She was basically like a second mother to me, and when it finally all blew up, I never saw her again and began to feel like it was a problem with me and not my parents. I also felt insanely jealous of the other partners when I was younger. I felt like my parents cared about them more than me and that they would leave me to go and start a new family with them. I didn't mean to paint the whole experience as negative. There were a few positives, and I feel like because of how open my parents were about their situation, dating was a lot easier for me than other people. Plus the extra Christmas presents were always a bonus. This isn't exactly what you asked, but you might find it interesting. My parents are monogamously married, but they were distantly socially acquainted with carers to and more house people, polycommunal people, and I grew up in a milieu where poly felt pretty much like a normal option, nothing that needed a lot of explanation. My observations are that a lot of kids who grow up in what the adults considered to be poly households just thought of it as dad is banging the babysitter, mom has a special friend. Not everybody, obviously, but I think a lot of what goes on in sex-positive circles, and has gone on since the 70s, is fundamentally about adults. Children are an afterthought. Not everyone, not always, but the Heinleinian fantasy of sexually liberated, emotionally stable adults raising children together? I've never seen it, and I have seen a lot of poly. I've also seen a lot of het poly situations break up over paternity concerns. Generally, the kids I know who grew up with any kind of poly around them overwhelmingly decline to repeat the experiment themselves. There are very prominent exceptions, like Sugar Bronco, but generally speaking I observe children of any kind of poly situation, no matter how stable, grow up to seek monogamous partnering. Moira Greyland's book is really the only book I've read that gives a sense of what growing up around this all was like, although it's politically problematic for a lot of people and badly needed better editing. Finally, a post that's relevant to me. I grew up with lesbian parents who were not polyamorous, but my biological father, sperm donor, has always played a big role in my life, and he's been happily in a 3-person relationship with 2 other guys for the past 25 years. I grew up in New Zealand and they lived on the other island to mine, so as a teenager I regularly, once or twice a year, went up to stay with them as a mini holiday. Think of my dad and his partners as uncle-type figures in my life, which was super important for me as a growing boy given that I come from a family of mostly women. I honestly respect their relationship so much more than anyone else I can think of. It's open, and entirely based on the love they have for each other, and others. In my dad's view, if you really love somebody then you want what's best for them, you don't want to put restrictions on their freedom to do things in their life. If someone does feel the need to put restrictions on the freedom of their partner, he thinks that it may be rooted in the insecurities they have about themselves, which is their own problem to be fixed within themselves. Mostly, he just believes in love, sexual, romantic, familial, or anything in between, which I totally respect and am open to. There are so many other things about their relationship that I value, but that's the gist of it. One of my siblings doesn't get on that well with my dad due to personality clashes, but I like to look for the best in people, and I think that he has a lot going on for him in his ability to live his life the way he wants to. Growing up in a relatively conservative family, I feel very proud of him to be at this point in his life where he's able to truly express himself. Feel free to ask me any questions about my upbringing. That's actually probably the least interesting thing about my childhood, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I found out a few months ago that my parents apparently had an open relationship when I was a kid. It didn't affect me at all. They had an adult life which I didn't know about. They were very open about sexuality, but they also recognized the line between healthy discussions of sex and oversharing. My childhood was shit, but that had nothing to do with their polyamorous life choices. I'm a teenager but not living with my polyamorous dad, but this is still happening. My father impregnated a woman, and she gave birth to a girl. They weren't married and my half-sister grew up relatively estranged with her mother. Then he met my mother, got her pregnant with me, and married her right after. He then had 3 more kids with her, 2 girls and another son. Then they broke up, messily, and my dad ran away to be with his best friend who is a lesbian. I don't understand all of it since I mostly grew up with my mom, but my dad now has 3 wives including the lesbian woman. He also has 7 children with those 3 women. I hate my father. He's evil and manipulated all of us to believe everything he says. He's really good at making friends, and he has this reputation of being Jesus-like. He even plays into the image by having long hair and a really long beard. My dad calls himself a Christian, but he's a cheat. He claimed to be a contractor, he's not, and cheated his church into paying for really bad construction work. He's the definition of a narcissist. He has claimed all of these crazy things. He said he broke his hand, but his wives, by the way, he's in his late 30s, 2 of his wives are in their early 20s, healed it by praying. He said that he has synesthesia, a form of autism according to him, which allows him to detect personality types. He lies so much. He told all of us that he has a liver condition that is treatable by some expensive drug or some bacteria in hops. In normal people language, that means he's an alcoholic. I know that turned into a rant about hating my dad, but there's little to like about him. And it's sad knowing that almost 10 of my other siblings have been conditioned into seeing him as some great man other than the crazy hack he really is. My eldest half-sister and my full siblings are the only ones who are old enough to understand this. And we have the advantage of growing up somewhat detached from him. Although I admit I used to be underneath his spell, he used to tell us to report our mother to the police for being abusive and stuff like that. I've anonymously tipped off CPS a few times about my young half-siblings' living situation to no avail. They live in a really cramped house with no heating, a barely functional kitchen and not enough hot water to clean everyone. My dad doesn't use protection, if the 12 kids wasn't evidence of it enough already. Oh, also, I really like how I'm named after him, and the other 11 of us have names that start with the same initial as him. I'm changing my name as soon as I turn 18. My mother's family has always been against my dad's living situation. But my dad always said that it's because they were ignorant and didn't understand love. My dad and his 3 wives are God's will according to him. I always ignored my family. I had cancer when I was a kid and I didn't have a lot of time to develop mentally. So I think that's why it took a long time for me to understand how messed up things were. I always felt a connection to my dad since we share the same name, and he made me feel special by saying stuff like it's God's will for me to have cancer. And how it inspired him to start a charity to help kids like me who have cancer. The charity hasn't done anything in several years, by the way, but someone who said they worked for him messaged me saying he uses his charity to write off things as tax-free. This is probably close-minded, but I could never be in a polygamous relationship. I think my experiences growing up has made me more protective of the people I love though. I have a lot of friends who I would never wish this upon. There was this girl in my class who said her parents were having a divorce, and I remember bursting into tears because I immediately thought about this crap happening to her step-siblings. Which is really pessimistic, I'd say. Hey, something I can actually answer. Throw away for reasons. I grew up in a Mormon family that practiced polygamy. My father had 3 wives, my mom being the last and youngest. Things were pretty okay as a child. It was pretty neat having 3 moms. If I couldn't get something from one of them, I'd ask another. Seriously. Having lots of brothers and sisters was pretty chill, too. Although, in retrospect, I probably didn't get the individualized attention I may have needed as a child. My dad and I both agree on this point nowadays. Anyway, my blissful existence changed around the time I was 14-15. We woke up to find that wife number 2 had moved herself and her children out in the middle of the night. These were my sisters and brothers. We were devastated. My parents tried to protect us from a lot of the fallout, but it was pretty inevitable. I'm 30 now, and don't really have any relationships with my half-brothers and sisters from either wife. My mom and dad remain happily married in a monogamous relationship, and I have my 2 full siblings to love on. As I've gotten older though, I've learned that the household was not as happy as I may have thought it was. There was a lot of resentment to go around, but no one was forced into anything either. Everyone went into it as consenting adults. I don't know if it's affected my view of love. Polygamy would never be for me. I'm far too selfish for that. So long as there is consent among all parties, and open communication if someone wants to do it, I really don't care. A lot of my extended family is still Fields and I love them.